1 for our Esper mid-range player.
And BBD's position in this matchup is going to be very much that classic aggro control of get some threats onto the battlefield and then hold up removal spells and counters to prevent Hand from resolving any of his big cards.
The hero's going to come across here for 2. Hand's going to fall down to 18. I do want to note here that this deck, this Esper mid-range deck, really popularized by Pro Tour Dominaria champion Wyatt Darby. Wyatt was a big proponent of this deck, and actually when we did that open in Indianapolis earlier this year, he did make the top 8 of it with Esper midrange. Didn't win it, and then actually moved away from the deck rather quickly, but it did get some new tools, did Esper midrange, like Dovin's Veto, like D-Spark, and like Sorin, Vengeful Bloodlord. So you're going to find a lot of new cards in this deck here from Brian.
How many copies of Mortify in the list?
I got 4.
Okay.
The full boat.
Ready for this matchup.
And D-Spark actually takes care of that enchantment as well. So Wilderness Reclamation is not a great card here for Dylan with regards to it living, as Thief of Sanity is going to hit. Dylan is going to fall down to 13. And also, I mean, you talk about Mortify, and I can talk about D-Spark, but the problem card is actually maybe the Thief of Sanity. It's so good in this matchup.
Yep, I mean, Hand does not play with removal spells, so the Thief's going to go uncontested. I guess the hope, if you're in Hand's position, is that there aren't a whole lot of hits in your deck that are disruptive. It's not like Hand's playing with a lot of counter spells himself or ways to remove Wilderness Reclamation. So if Brian hits some cantrips or whatever, that's, it's not great for you, but it's not the biggest problem in the world.
We'll see what comes next for Brian. Obviously, we don't know the card that he found from Thief of Sanity, but Brian's got some other tools in his hand that he is working with. This deck list of Esper midrange is, I think what you'd expect. The creatures here of Hero, Precinct 1, Thief of Sanity, Hostage Taker all make a lot of sense. Basilica, Bell Haunt has been worked out of these main decks, given it just simply wasn't powerful enough. And then plenty of spells. Thought Eraser may be the best of the bunch. You mentioned Mortify, and there being 4 copies, along with 2 copies of Dispark. Teferi Time Raveler is certainly in the deck as well. And there's a copy of Blast Zone there for Dylan Hand. His updates to Simic Nexus are readily apparent. Cardboard Live should have these deck lists up for you at home as well, so if you want to see exactly what 75 our players are working with, you'll get a pretty good idea.
3 copies of Blast Zone here in Hand's deck.
Our Simic Nexus players think that's a huge ad for them.
Yeah, well, the number of games that I've beaten Simic Nexus by just going 1-drop, 2-drop, burn you out, it's a lot. Mm-hmm. And having a low opportunity cost way to interact with cheap permanents is very good for this deck. And obviously the card also plays very well when you have this amount of mana via Wilderness Reclamation.
2 blue, 2 green, and a colorless mana floating from the Wilderness Reclamation. We'll see how Dylan wants to move forward. Looks like he's going to try to do it with a copy of Nexus of Fate. Now keep in mind, Brian does have a copy of Dovin's Veto in hand. That's that new negate-ish type spell. But this one isn't really worth countering because it's not really getting a lot done, this Nexus of Fate.
Yeah, Hand has nothing to really leverage here. He's not drawing cards. Usually the line where you want to fight over the Nexus of Fate, rather, is when the leftover mana allows Hand to draw cards or do something analogous to it. If he's just taking an extra draw step, who really cares? But, if you're activating as Kanta, if you have 4 mana left over and there's a Chemister's Insight in the equation, then it starts becoming appealing to try to counter it.
You also saw Blast Zone have a counter placed onto it, so it's up to 2 as that Engineered Explosives-esque land. This one's going to be a pretty powerful one. And there's the battlefield with a charge counter on it. You can pay XX and put a charge counter on it as well. And then very Engineered Explosives-esque 3-tap, sacrifice, destroy permanents of the non-land variety with counters equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone, as now Blast Zone does have 3 counters, and a Sorcerer's Kanta has now entered the battlefield. So, Brian.
Oh, sick. Thief of Sanity.
What card is that?
Growth Spiral.
Oh, Growth Spiral, right, okay.
Thief.
Yeah, I was like, that's a Growth Spiral, right? Yeah. But it's Dylan's Growth Spiral. That's pretty cute. And that'll allow Brian to put a Godless Shrine onto the battlefield tapped on the end of Dylan's turn. Now BBD is going to untap all those permanents. It's time for him to draw a card. The best part of Magic, as they say. We'll see what he finds. As he's already got a pretty nice battlefield, and Thief of Sanity is obviously a great card in these spots. Isolated Chapel is the land. And Brian's going to come across here for 6 points of damage. Dylan going to fall down to 7. Thief of Sanity will trigger. And Brian will take a look at the top 3 cards of Dylan's deck once again. Those cards will be exiled. Looks like a Root Snare. Pardon me. They'll go to the graveyard. The Root Snare and the, looks like Memorial to Folly. So Brian's found a card that he's happy with.
Cards going to the graveyard here is significant for the purposes of Search for Azcanta transforming.
True. I take that back. It was actually a copy of Memorial to Genius. That is the blue one. So apologies for the mistake as Brian continues to move forward with his turn in his second main phase. What you can't see is Patrick is playing with Mountains and Shocks.
My order from StarCityGames.com.
That's right. Can't get it out of his system even when he's broadcasting.
When they do a show in Virginia, they charge sales tax because Star City Games is based out of Roanoke, Virginia.
That's correct.
So I had to keep the order kind of light this time.
Ah, nice.
Can't get chiseled by the state.
Yeah.
2 Stronghold Shocks, 2 Mirage Mountains.
That's nice.
Total charge, I believe, was roughly $2.75. And then I'm sure Amex ate up all the fees.
Probably, yeah.
So Star City is just giving it away.
Hostage taker here will make a token from Hero of Precinct 1.
And
you are ridiculous.
BBD suspiciously leaving up 2 mana.
Yes. Memorial here from Dylan.
Well, that gets him to 6 cards in the graveyard. So now, if the priority here is just transform as Kanta, he's got it no matter what.
And that might be the priority. Well, it's an island. They do the count. 7 means that Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin, is now on the battlefield there for Dylan Hand. He'll draw a card for his turn. Can he actually get something going here? Does have a copy of Wilderness Reclamation on the battlefield and could maybe go off this turn. Don't forget that Blast Zone is on 3 counters, though it doesn't blow up anything right now because Hostage Taker has taken a Thief of Sanity hostage. Dylan's going to activate Azcanta on the main phase. Let's see what he finds. That is a copy of Sinister Sabotage. So some main deck counter magic here for Dylan this weekend.
Although now the uncounterable negate is going to come into play here.
Yes, it is.
Because if Hand is doing this thinking that Root Snare plus Counterspell should get him out of this turn and then he gets to overwhelm next turn, he's going to be disappointed.
A land there for Dylan. He'll float some mana from the Wilderness Reclamation. Looks like 2 blue and a colorless. And now it's just going to be an Azcanta activation, so a little bit of shortcutting. There's a copy of Nexus of Fate. The rest of the cards will go to the bottom of the deck. So if Dylan's plan is Fog, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, Brian is actually attacking for lethal this turn, and a Root Snare will not be protected by Sinister Sabotage because of the power of Dovin's veto. Dovin saying absolutely not as we head over to Brian. On Brian's upkeep, Dylan is going to play a copy of Root Snare. Thinking I've got Sinister Sabotage, I should be good to go, but Brian has a copy of Dovin's veto.
I love it when it matters. I love when the extra text matters.
This is the brand new one from War of the Spark that got previewed. This counter spell cannot be countered. Counter target non-creature spell. We know that text from negate. A little bit more difficult to cast, yes, but that line of text certainly does matter in this spot. And Brian Braun-Duin is going to win game number 1 here over Dylan Hand.
Also, it's gold.
Oh, I get it. For the hero.
The hero.
I can be a hero, baby. BBD continuing his winning ways. London wasn't the only place he was going to get some wins. He'll do it in Richmond as well. He'll do it anywhere that Magic is to be played as we take a look at the sideboards here. And we're going to start with Dylan Hand on your left. It's 3 Arboreal Grazer, 3 Biogenic Ooze, 3 Negate, 2 Bond of Flourishing, 2 Carnage Tyrant, and 2 Crushing Canopy here, partner. The ability to go aggressive. Maybe not so much for this matchup?
Well, I like the Biogenic Ooze. The BBD is attacking on the ground. He doesn't have a ton of removal. It seems like a very good matchup for that. And I don't know. The Grazer seems a little mopey to me, but it's possible Hand. You know, BBD is attacking with so many 2-power creatures that maybe you want that one too.
For BBD, it's 2 copies of Basilica Bellhaunt, 2 copies of Davriel Rogue Shadow Mage. That's kind of the new discard planeswalker. You got 2 Deputy Detention, 2 Dovin's Veto. The first one was already so good. Might want more of those in this matchup. 2 Duress, 2 Moment of Craving, 2 Time Wipe, and a copy of Unmoored Ego that could snipe those copies of Nexus of Fate. What are we thinking here?
The Unmoored Ego, the Duresses, and the Dovin's Vetoes seem very good to me. I would also buy Davriel as well.
These are a lot of good cards here for Ryan. We're looking at 2, 4, 6, that's 7 cards at least.
And a lot of removal that he can cut here.
Yeah, can get rid of the copies of Eternal, Enter the God Eternals, pardon me, Liliana,
Hostage Taker,
Dreadhorde General, Hostage Taker, those can all go.
Yep.
Absolutely. So Brian's Esper mid-range deck is very mid-range. He's got a higher curve, some copies of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria in the main deck as well. Less creature-centric, more spell-centric, and he can really dial it up now for the sideboard games. This is already won game number 1. So these players will sideboard. They'll get ready for a second game here, and while they're working on that, we are working on this. It is the Star City Games' new run of personality tokens. You've seen them throughout the year, and we've got 5 more awesome ones to bring you here over the course of May and June. Sets of 5 included with SCG Con Summer VIP upgrades, entry into Star City Games Open or Classics, and any StarCityGames.com order of $20 or more. Let's go over these tokens, folks. Let's take a look at our friends like 40 card Ben Friedman. He's the new Goblin token. I've been retired, and Ben Friedman has been hired. Looks like he's riding a boar of some sorts. So there is Ben Friedman, someone you and I have known for a very long time. We go to our next one. We'll take a look at the Esper Professor, Shaheen Sarani, who is here this weekend. I'm sure we'll watch him play Esper at some point.
Oh,
right?
we had a nice chat. I'll tell you about it.
Oh, I can't wait. We go to our next token here, and it is Ari Lax, who is flying away as an angel token. He, of course, was our Bitter Blossom fairy token for a long time, but now he's an angel. We go to our next one. It is Sheldon Menry, who is an Elder Dragon. Makes some sense for the Commander aficionado. He's a 4/4 flyer. And last but not least, my favorite one of the bunch, the copy in Benny Smith. There are so many. It looks like he's out of the Matrix. Those are our 5 tokens here for May and June. Again, many different ways to go about getting them. The sets in 5 are included with SCG Con Summer VIP upgrades, entry into any Star City Games Open or Classic, and any StarCityGames.com order of $20 or more. And don't forget, you can collect your set by participating in Star City Games Invitational Qualifiers. Please tell me this story about Shaheen.
So, walked past Shaheen during the players' meeting. I'm like, you know, what you playing? And hands me his deck, and I'm going through it. It's Esper Control.
Weird.
It's going through. One copy of Dovin's Veto in his main deck, going through. And I handed it back to him, and I'm like, I want a second negate in this deck.
Okay.
And he goes, that was the last cut, and it's been killing me. He had one copy of the Destroy a Non-Land Permanent, cost 4 or greater.
4 or less.
4. I thought the black-white one was 4 or greater.
Dispark Smother. Dispark Smother for 4 or less.
That's the blue-black one, right?
That's Tyrant Scorn. Okay, yeah.
I'm thinking of the white-black one.
White-black, okay.
Maybe I have the card confused. I was like, I kind of would want to cut that and have a second Dovin's Veto. And he goes, we were debating 1 Dovin's Veto, 1 copy of that, and 1 copy of Vraska's Contempt as the last 2 slots. Couldn't figure it out.
Boy, look at you two, really in the grindhouse there.
Yeah. Had some good Esper chats to start my morning off.
Both these players taking
the look on his face when I was like, I kind of want a second negate, and he's just in pain knowing that he also wants the second negate and couldn't quite get it in the deck.
Brian's hand's a nice one here. He's got that thought eraser, pardon me, and a Dovin's Veto that helped him win game number 1 as we head back over to Dylan Hand here. He'll play a Hinterland Harbor. Does he have a search for his Kanta? He does. Very powerful enchantment will hit the battlefield as we head back over to BBD. That's an isolated chapel. That is a copy of Thought Eraser. He'll be surveilling in a moment. For now, we take a look at the hand. You see an Opt. You see a Sinister Sabotage. It looks like a Callous Dismissal, a Blast Zone, and a Forest here for Dylan Hand.
The Callous Dismissal, a way to just sort of, you know, it just kind of works on its own, and then also it is a way to win the game once you're taking all the turns.
And you were correct. The Spark is exile target permanent converted mana cost 4 or greater.
Right.
Well, that's my mistake there, learning these new cards. There goes the Sinister Sabotage. Brian will surveil, so take a look at the top card, and it will either stay on top or head to the graveyard. We'll see in just a moment.
Yeah, you were thinking of the Smother or Unsummon.
Yeah, Tyrant
Demir card?
Yeah. Hero of Precinct 1's going to head to the bin. We're going to head back over to Dylan. He's going to take a look at the top card with Search for Escanta. The original Surveiller. We'll see what Dylan wants to do with this card now that Brian knows that he knows all the cards in his hand. There goes a Chemister's Insight. Not a bad place for that.
The burden is so high on keeping a card on the top of your deck here with Escanta. It's so good just to race to get this transformed as soon as possible, especially against a deck with Mortify. That I can understand, BBD's not much up to very much. His deck's very attrition-oriented. Drawing a Chemister's Insight could be really good, but I think Hand just wants to keep the ball rolling here.
This will be an opt here for Dylan.
I get it. It's a painful one to mill over there, but you just got to get to 7 cards as fast as you can.
Now, you did mention all those Mortifies that are hanging out here, 4 in the main deck. Now, the Spark cannot catch Search for Escanta, but it can take care of Wilderness Reclamation. As Opt is done resolving, we're going to head back over to Dylan. Hand now, he'll take a look. There are 3 cards in the graveyard. This could be number 4, and it is. There goes a Growth Spiral.
It's another good card to draw. It just doesn't matter. Got to keep churning.
And Dylan will play a Forest and simply pass the turn back. Keep in mind, among those lands is a copy of Blast Zone as we head over to BBD. An open winner, mini invitational top 8s, Players Championship appearance, former world champion. The resume is long here for Brian. No buys here this weekend, but he's off to a great 1-0 start and currently up a game against Dylan in the very popular Simic Nexus deck.
And the way this game is shaping up is making me really nervous for BBD. Because if you're sitting here waiting and not applying any pressure, you are going to get buried by Escanta.
A little too controlling, perhaps, as Dylan is going to discard and jumpstart his Chemister's Insight. So still 4 cards in the graveyard, and now it's time to surveil again with Search for Escanta. There goes Nexus of Fate, but that will get shuffled back in. And again, it does make you wonder what's going on in Brian's hand. We know about the Dovin's Veto, but he hasn't played a Hero of Precinct 1, actually surveilled one away. We haven't seen Thief of Sanity. And we do know he gets to sideboard in a lot of cards.
There's a lot of ways that I like BBD's matchup, and we kind of saw in the first game. He goes threat, threat. Now there's this wall of counter spells. You can't really do anything. It does make me nervous here that BBD does not have – he just doesn't have that many creatures, and that's more the case if he cut his Hostage Takers post-board. And if you sit around not doing anything – and as Escanta transforms, we're all done.
Well, I can kind of see the kind of game that Brian's trying to play here. There is Teferi Time Raveler, and this is a huge card in this matchup and a card we will, of course, take a look at. It is another new Planeswalker from War of the Spark. And the idea is to defend this card. So this is an attempt at Sinister Sabotage here by Dylan. And we know that Brian has a copy of Dovin's Veto in hand. Dylan doesn't know that, but we do, and so there is Dovin's Veto. Now, Teferi in this matchup is a huge one. 3-mana Planeswalker starts with 4 counters, and it's actually going to go down to 1. Each opponent can cast spells only anytime they could cast a sorcery, and that's a big deal for the Wilderness Reclamation deck, of course. You can +1 it until your next turn. You may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash, which certainly plays a role in things. And then the -3, return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand. Draw a card. So Teferi did bounce that copy of Search for Escanta. We had a small counter war. Teferi resolved, but that means that Dylan had the opportunity to resolve Biogenic Ooze. And so now Dylan is trying to take an aggressive slant to this matchup and maybe kill that Teferi.
Well, Biogenic Ooze, I think, is very strong against BBD. He can't leave in that much creature removal. He does a lot of attacking on the ground, and Biogenic Ooze unchecked totally invalidates Planeswalkers as an angle of attack. Hand's going to be able to go wide and run down any Planeswalker pretty easily.
Now, do remember this event here, unlike Mythic Championship 2 in London, this is not an open deck list event. So you don't know exactly what the configuration that your opponent has in front of it. If you're watching at home, well, you do because of Cardboard Live. And we, of course, have the deck list in front of us. But Brian doesn't know exactly what Dylan's bringing to the table for the sideboarded games. And we know that the Simic Nexus deck does play creatures in the sideboard, as you're going to see Mortify take care of the real copy of Biogenic Ooze. But the token is still left behind. So Dylan has sideboarded in at least 1 creature, and maybe more, as a Godless Shrine will enter the battlefield tapped, and we will head back over to Dylan Hand, as he might have the ability to take care of that problematic Teferi and continue along his game plan. Blast Zone also you get a lot of utility from that card as well, because that's also another answer for Teferi.
It's one of those cards where even if it doesn't get activated, the threat of it getting activated warps opposing play. And I think that's an overlooked thing in terms of opportunity costs and how strong are these cards. That was a lot of the energy experience. Your opponent could do stuff that you had to play around, but was never forced to commit to it. It's a really strong thing.
Search for Escanto. Looks like that's going to get countered as well, but there's another search there for Dylan. So Dylan will play a land as well, and we could see the search for Escanto that just resolved be transforming next turn. So things are looking pretty good right now for Dylan hand, but this goes back to what you mentioned a few turns ago. It's the lack of pressure from Brian that's kind of resulted in all of this.
And hand's got to feel really good about that turn because or that turn orbit rather, because he was able to get a Mortify out of BBD, one of the answers to a search for Escanto, and then got to get one of BBD's premier cards in the matchup in Dovin's Veto on a redundant search for Escanto. And he still got the Ooze token in play. So this is looking really good right now for hand.
Teferi is back. It's going to bounce, search for Escanto again, and Brian will get to draw a card. This is one of those Planeswalkers, if you talk to the host of the game podcast, be it Brian Gottlieb, Jerry Thompson, or many of the faces in the crowd here that we see on our SCG Tour leaderboard, they feel like Teferi is going to have a very big impact on this format, but certainly in this matchup.
3 mana and you're guaranteed to get your money is that card's going to be good.
Yeah.
Don't really need to know anything else.
Biogenic Goose is going to take care of it again, though. And now here is a Carnage Tyrant. So Dylan has fully gone to the creature package. The combination of Ooze and Carnage Tyrant means that Brian, I'm curious if he has prepared for this, and it appears as though he hasn't. He's just going to play a Hallowed Fountain tap and passes the turn back. Dylan's going to come across for a healthy chunk here. It looks like 10 damage is going to come across. And it could just be the old 1-2 punch, as Dylan actually has another copy of Biogenic Ooze in hand. Dovin's Veto is going to take care of that search for Escanto. And Dylan does have another copy of Biogenic Ooze in hand that he will deploy. I would be surprised if Brian has something like a Kaya's Wrath or a Time Wipe after sideboard. This is slightly risky, but probably ultimately safe.
You would have seen a Kaya's Wrath last turn.
Yes.
If it was there, so.
And Brian, as we do know, does have 2 copies of Time Warp in the sideboard, and perhaps if he didn't have them in before, he would bring them in now, as Dylan has tied things up here against Brian Braun-Duin. Civic Nexus, Esper Midrange, getting ready here for game number 3. Todd Anderson hanging out near the booth. Did you win? Todd did not win. He got Cindervined. That's a tough card for his deck to beat. So Team of Reclamation sitting at 1-1. Here this weekend for Todd Anderson, and one of these players is going to be 1-1 when all is said and done, but one will be 2-0. And I do got to ask you here, partner, do you change things up if you're BBD? He's going back to the drawing board. Do you bring in something like a Time Wipe against these creatures that just killed you?
Probably. I mean, you want to get away a little bit from how anti-spell your deck is, seeing how you lost the game. It's to me an open question of even if you want duress post-board. I guess Escanto's probably threatening enough that you still want to be able to interact with some of that stuff, but yeah, I think you have to really strongly consider the anti-creature stuff.
This will be an interesting thing because now Brian's being pulled a couple different ways. You want to have some anti-creature stuff to be able to beat Ooze and Carnage Tyrant because those are 2 very real threats, but you still want to have a good balance of being aggressive like we saw in game number 1, being able to counter stuff and be able to disrupt your opponent as well with discard and counter magic. So we'll see how the former world champion wants to build his deck after sideboard for this 3rd game in which he'll be on the play.
I would say this from BBD's side, definitely not playing anything that's explicitly about interacting with Wilderness Reclamation. I do not believe it is in hand's deck. And now seeing the 3-mana Teferi, I would cut it even if it was still in game 2. Because that card does so much to take the wind out of the sails of Wilderness Reclamation.
So are you saying you would cut Teferi, or?
No, I'm saying that I would cut Wilderness Reclamation.
Oh, if you're Dylan.
For sure.
Okay.
And if I'm BBD, if any of the cards that I have in my deck right now are about answering Wilderness Reclamation, if that's the main reason, I'm removing them.
Okay. So you're thinking that Dylan is saying, I'm out of here with that stuff, so you want to be as well.
He's playing so much more on his own turn now because he's brought in the creatures. And Teferi, Mortify, Dovin's Veto, there's just so many cards that make it bad.
That you're still covered.
Yeah.
If Dylan were to play a Wilderness Reclamation, you probably will have an answer to it.
Right.
Okay. That makes some sense to me.
And Teferi is sort of just another piece of that.
Yep.
It does a lot to take the impact of Wilderness Reclamation out of the game.
Makes total sense. Well, these players are shuffling up. They're getting ready here for game number 2. We will take a moment to talk about the StarCityGames.com Creature Collection. Oh, for Queen and Country. Now this is, I think, my favorite one of this year thus far.
For Queen and Country.
Little dog with the hat. What do they call these guards in England? What is it?
Beefeaters?
Is that their name? I don't know their name. I feel like I should know this.
Hold on.
These are like the stoic guards who they just don't they don't smile or anything.
So I don't know if this is actually the name of that, or I just have it confused with the gin that has the logo of one of these.
For some reason I'm leaning towards the latter.
No, I'm right.
Oh, okay.
Buffeteers were guards in the palace of French kings. They protected the king's food. However, the name Beefeaters is more likely to have originated from the time when the yeoman's warders at the tower were paid part of their salary with chunks of beef. This took place right up until the 1800s.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm wrong. That's a different thing. Whatever. For Queen and Country, go.starcgames.com/creature collection.
Did Wikipedia lie to you?
I was looking at the wrong thing.
Did you just read the first thing that you saw on your phone?
No, they dress very similarly to the Queen's guards, which is where I got confused.
All right.
Can we try to drum up a sponsorship with Beefeater Gin?
That I'm going to leave that to you.
Okay.
It seems like a deal you should negotiate.
I'm happy to make the call.
Okay. All right. That's all you, partner.
Yeah. Anyhow, there you go.
Dovin's veto in hand again here for Brian. 1, 2, 3.
Yep,
it's like 7.
Duress and Dovin's veto. It's a hand that's very good against non-creatures.
And I saw, there's the Duress, and I think I saw a thought eraser as well. But a couple copies of Gross Spiral, Tameo, Bonds of Flourishing, Forest, and Hinterland Harbor there for Dylan Hand. So it's a hand that Dylan's going to keep every single time, and Duress is going to try to start picking some of it apart. We are here in Louisville, the River City, as we're watching Brian Braun-Duin do battle against Dylan Hand in round number 2. We're not in Louisville. We're in Richmond. Just kidding. That's embarrassing. We're gonna be in Louisville. Apparently the Kentucky Derby's happening right now. I just learned that.
Okay.
Go, I don't know any of the horses. Go random horsey I would bet on that I shouldn't.
I find it,
Oh, this should be good.
Find it unpleasant.
Yeah. Bro, I don't watch the Kentucky Derby. Come on. Tameo down. Duress is done resolving. There's a Hinterland Harbor that will end the battlefield tap.
I'm sure it's a very, very hard thing to do. I really don't like just the amount of respect given to the jockey in comparison to the horse.
I would agree.
The horse is really doing the hard work there.
I'm inclined to agree with no knowledge of the sport. Bonds of Flourishing down. 3 Gross Spirals here for Dylan as Brian will surveil, leave that card on top, and we're heading back to Dylan Hand. He's picked up a forest and an island. He'll play the island. Well, he got it. Kind of got to play it now when you give it away.
Nah.
I guess I will say, as there's Thief of Sanity, Gross Spiral into an opt, and then you play the island allows you to opt.
Yeah.
So I get why Dylan reversed course there. He just plays a forest off the Gross Spiral. There is an island. This is a Gross Spiral. Draw a card. That is a Searcher's Consta, so Gross Spiral did not find a land to put onto the battlefield.
You know what card I would remove from Hand's deck if I was in his position in sideboarding?
I think you're going to say Searcher's Consta?
Nexus of Fate.
Ah.
Like, why? If you're going to get how's it resolving? And how's it ever going to be good? It's going to be good in positions where you're already winning, right?
I think in this matchup, it's going to be, given how the games will play after sideboard, it will probably just be a very, very expensive time walk.
I don't think he's going to get it to resolve.
I would be surprised. I think if it does resolve, it will just be bad.
Right. Or he's already winning. Like, he's got Carnage Tyrant, and who cares, right?
Thief of Sanity with the hit. Water Your Grave. One to the battlefield tap there for Brian. We're going to head back over to Dylan. That is a Carnage Tyrant going to the graveyard. Looks like that's card number 7, folks. Pass the turn back. Escanta is on the battlefield, and Thief of Sanity is 2. 2 card advantage engines. We'll see who gets the better of it as here comes the Thief. That'll work. 3 cards here for Brian to choose from as Dylan falls down to 16.
Players in the 10 a.m. and 11:30 modern challenges. Your next round players are being posted at the
Brian thinking very carefully on what card he'd like to take. There are some big hits for Brian in spots like this. That is to be sure. Wilderness Reclamation and Nexus of Fate will go away. Nexus Fate will get shuffled back in.
I'm really surprised these cards are still in Hand's deck. I mean, he brought in 6 creatures. What got cut? Root Snares, I guess?
I can see Root Snares being bad. Deck isn't that aggressive. I think Root Snare is a very easy first cut, say that. And maybe, maybe he's only down to like 2 Nexus and 2 Wilderness Reclamation or something.
I think he's got quite a few copies of Nexus of Fate.
An activation here of his Kanta will reveal Tameo. Now here's a Growth Spiral on the end step. Draw a card. Is there a land to place on the battlefield? There is not. So Dylan Hand will untap. He'll draw a card. Didn't find a land there. Not sure exactly what he's working with, but we will see if he's got a way to beat this Thief of Sanity, something that's very difficult for a blue-green deck to do.
Yeah. What's his path to resolving something that matters is the question here.
Well, he's going to start by just casting Tameo. See if that resolves. Dovin's Veto says absolutely not. And Hand will just have to pass the turn back over to Braun-Duin. And now it's a game of Thief of Sanity and Permission/Disruption. A game that Brian is very well equipped to play as here comes the Thief once again. Top 3 cards here for Brian to choose from. 2 of them will go into Dylan's graveyard and 1 of them will be hidden. See if we can get a good look at it. Tameo and a Forest among the options here for BBD. But this is a very comfortable position for Brian. There's also a search for his Kanta in there. So it looks like Brian's going to take the Tameo. The search and the Forest will go to the graveyard. Brian will play a land.
Question here of how much mana is BBD willing to commit on his own turn.
And I think that's the thing he's trying to figure out too, is it looks like he's going to try to resolve Tameo, and this will be a negate that's going to take care of it. So the tough thing here for Dylan is that he's had negate-esque backup for some things, but that line on Dovin's Veto, this spell cannot be countered, has proven to be vital for BBD.
Yeah, it's been very good. And if you're curious why some Nexus players splash red, this match is highlighting why. It is not easy for Simic Nexus to get out of this spot of there's a creature on the battlefield that's doing something problematic, and my opponent they can play back at me with counter spells or whatever.
I mean, when we had Todd in here briefly after round number 1, he talked about with Teamer Reclamation about how against Simic Nexus, Thief of Sanity is very good against his deck with the shocks.
Garbage.
And it's garbage.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why, as someone who's played a lot of mono red, I really prefer playing against Simic Nexus than the Teamer style decks because they have Shivan Fires and shocks and they can interact. Your draws against Simic Nexus where you go 1-drop, 2-drop, and then you have some burn spells, they need to have the nuts to keep up.
Yep.
They can beat that draw, but their hand has to be perfect. The decks that have access to red, they can just shock your thing and buy themselves a lot of time. And Thief of Sanity is another, it's not the same as Gitu Lava Runner, but it's a lot of the same concept. It's a problematic card. You can't remove it. You just got to play through it. And post-board, what's the plan here? I mean, I guess Hand's plan here is to try to pivot to creatures a little bit and get out from under it that way, but it's still going to be tough sledding no matter what.
Biogenic Ooze among the cards that have been placed in Hand's graveyard. Hand's been given a Chemister's Insight as well, but the card that Brian took was actually a copy of Sinister Sabotage, so it's a pretty big deal there. Dylan He's got a little something to do here on Brian's end step. It looks like he's going to jumpstart a Chemist's Insight, and is just trying to figure out what he wants to discard to fire that up. It'll be Nexus of Fate.
Shocking.
Yeah, that's a better place for it. Might be back into the deck. Well, you know, this is a learning experience, I think, for everyone involved. You know, watching at home, maybe Dylan playing with the deck. I mean, that's a very expensive spell that's not really going to get to do its thing in sideboard games, it appears. You're asking a lot for it to work.
Yeah, it seems awfully optimistic to me. And also, if BBD has something like, you know, Unmoored Ego, that's going to be the first name regardless. You know, he's going to be, or I guess not necessarily the first thing.
Because he just may not care.
Yeah, BBD's protected might be that I don't care, but, you know, that's also an indictment on having it in your deck.
Dylan will pass the turn back over to Brian. There is a Chemist's Insight. And that was Dylan's Chemist's Insight, so Brian will get a little bit deeper into his deck. But again, with how Brian is trying to configure things around Thief of Sanity, around Teferi, and around his counter spells, this is exactly how he would like the game to go. Maybe a little bit more pressure with Hero, but outside of that, I think he's happy with how things are going.
Yeah, this is about the script. Like you said, you'd like a little bit more pressure. Holding off for 10 turns while you hit with a Thief of Sanity 10 times is, you know, there's some risk involved there. But, you know, you have something pressuring, you have something that's disruptive in the Thief of Sanity, and then, you know, hopefully your duresses and negates and so forth can prevent hand from doing anything good. This is the script.
Brian taking a long look at his hand. He's found the card that he wants to select. There's a Water Grave untapped. Brian's life total is very high, so he's not very worried about much of anything. And now there's the Hero, so adds a little bit of pressure now.
This is really, I mean, hand's probably got to go, like, now.
Mm-hmm.
He's got 2 turns at the max, and depending on the details, might not even have that long.
It'll be a Chemist's Insight, discarding a Search for Escanto. So Jumpstart away, and now it'll be an activation of Escanto, the Sunken Ruin. So Dylan will take a look at the top handful of cards, pick up a copy of Growth Spiral. But it also begs the question here, if you are Dylan Hand, is what are you looking for? What are you trying to find that kind of reverses course in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have Root Snares in your deck, and I think at this point we can pretty safely assume that he doesn't, he's drawing to cards that draw more cards and a handful of creatures.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically it. And his copies of Nexus of Fate.
And that's not much.
No. Although he might take the hit here from BBD and then end step try to test spell out a Nexus of Fate. At least get BBD to commit some mana here.
Brian will take a look at the top couple of cards. It looks like he very quickly selected Nexus of Fate there, from what I could tell. That's the one Thief of Sanity activation that did not take a lot of time. Now, there may have just been 2 lands, and it looks like there were, along with the spell, so he doesn't have to think about that one all that much. For Brian now, it's going to be a copy of Duress. He wants to see exactly what Dylan is working with. Dylan's going to cast a negate. That will resolve. Dylan is going to try to resolve a Nexus of Fate.
Yeah, I know. I can hand trying to maybe juke a little bit here and draw some extra cards and go for it next turn. I think he's just got to spend his mana here.
Looks like we got a quick judge call here. Brian's got a question.
And I think the question that BBD is asking is, if Dylan Hand resolves Nexus of Fate, and in response I resolve my own Nexus of Fate, what happens? My guess is play just proceeds as normal. Hand takes his turn, and then BBD takes his.
Sure.
But I believe that's the question.
Well, there's a Nexus, and that is going to do it, and that was the question. So Brian's going to win game number 3 here over Dylan Hand.
So I guess my understanding is incorrect. I guess it goes BBD takes it, and then Hand would get 2.
So what would happen is Dylan's resolves.
Yep.
So he gets to take the next turn, and then Brian just says, okay,
I'm taking